had to be imported, except they had excellent lumber out there and all kinds of timber available. And they imported things, brought in things like a grand piano for the music room and all kinds of fancy things which had to be hauled in by horse and wagon from the nearest railhead, which was 20 miles away or 25 miles away. There were two railheads, actually, two different railroads, one kind of south and the other east of Estes Park. And you had to come one way or the other. And so the hotel, this grandiose hotel, which really only had about 110 rooms, may have had a few more then because they wouldn't have as many bathrooms originally as they'd have now, opened in 1909. And the first people who attended, they had a druggist convention up there. Druggists from Denver came up there, and that was the first convention they hosted. But the hotel was quite successful as far as patronage, and yet it's a question if it ever made money, even in his best years. But F.O. enjoyed it. He built a fancy carriage house. He built a music pavilion, concert hall, they called that. He built an annex to the hotel, which was almost an exact copy of the hotel on a smaller scale next to it. And once the hotel was pretty well along, well, I got a little ahead. There was a stage line down at one of the railheads in Loveland, and I guess another in the other place, Lyons, Colorado, that had had early touring cars, and were starting to travel the roads into Estes Park. And one of the stage lines, the Osborne brothers, had several Stanley touring cars. They had 5 or 6 of them. But it was, 3 or 4 people per trip is all you could carry in those little cars. So F.O. talked to his brother back in Newton and said, why can't we build a larger car so we can carry more people at one time? And that's how the mountain wagons started in 1909. The first of them that were shipped to the Rockies had 3 seats for 9 passengers, and were a somewhat shorter car all the way around than the 1915 that I had. But they had something. We think they built just under 300 mountain wagons in the 6 or 7 years that they built them, and we think that probably almost half of them were in Colorado and in the West. But a lot of resort hotels in New England and in places like the Poconos also bought the mountain wagons and found them very useful. And they were used 90% of the time for meeting the trains. Sometimes they take the last seat off and carry luggage back there, and the other seats for passengers, and travel back and forth from the station to the hotel. F.O. Stanley lived to be an old man. The tuberculosis never killed him. He died in 1940 at the age of 91. And the hotel, well, he sold it in 1926, but he kept an eye on it, and he still lived in Estes Park most of the year, and was around and was eventually known as the Grand Old Man of Estes Park. Even a good many years before that, he was considered a pretty prominent citizen out there. People had heard of Stanley steamers and of the Stanleys, and so when some of the politicians and all, well, maybe it wasn't the politicians' idea, some of the nature people got the idea to establish Rocky Mountain National Park, and they had to convince the politicians in Denver and the senators in Washington and all that it was a good idea. F.O. Stanley was asked to be very prominent in that effort, which he was. And Estes Park today is right at the entrance, the east entrance to Rocky Mountain National Park. The hotel changed hands many times. As I said, he sold it in 1926. But it's still operating today, still under the name Stanley Hotel, still very much the way it was when it was built. 3 or 4 years you have a different story to tell about it, but right now the owners seem to have plenty of money to spend on the old building and renovate and bring it up to date. It's a tough property to market in today's society because it's not large enough to have large conventions there. They have the hotel and the annex, I guess, about completely renovated, and together they may have like 125 rooms, but that's still pretty small when you're thinking of a convention hotel. And they have plans to restore the concert hall and maybe even the carriage house, which the Stanley Museum is hoping might be a satellite museum for their operation from Maine. That remains to be seen. On violins, it was mainly a hobby with the Stanleys. There really was no violin business. I'm sure they may have made some on special order for people. And F.O., who had been a great whittler all his life, loved to make violins in his retirement years in Estes Park. And their nephew, Carlton Stanley, really engaged in the violin business. Carlton was the son of their oldest brother, and when he was a young man, about 1903, when Carlton was, the Stanleys were just getting underway, and well, I guess a little before that, he went to Montreal as a salesman for the Stanley Dry Plate Company. And he stayed up there as a salesman and ran the dealership for the Stanleys in Montreal after they started building cars. From 1903 on, he was the agent in Montreal. He met a Montreal girl and they married her, and his wife was from Montreal. However, Carlton came back to Boston and lived in the Boston area in later years. And he did make several hundred violins, so I guess you'd have to say it was definitely a business with him. I think where it says 2, that means the bottom of the last page, so that's the end of the lecture.
Just out of curiosity, are any of those Stanley violins in the hands of any artists? Or?
Yes, there are a few around. The Stanley Museum up in Maine has 2 or 3 at least, I believe. And I think there's a few out at Estes Park, maybe. Any questions before we break up? Excuse me, somebody say something.
It's sold on eBay, they said. Somebody
Oh,
sold
he's come by. Tom, recently?
I guess about 6 weeks ago.
Did you?
How much? How much out of curiosity?
I don't honestly remember.
Oh,
Saw one today for 49,000.
should have grabbed it, man. Jeez.
You saw a Stanley violin?
Oh, no, it was a car.
Oh, a car.
I'm sorry.
Where was it?
Shoot. It was on the computer.
Oh.
Yeah, my computer friends, of whom there are a good many, a lot of them within hearing distance here, are always turning up things on eBay and so forth, Stanley items, and I think they think that someday I'll tell them they can bid on one for me, but I haven't said that. So we're happy to have you. I'm sorry it's not quite as warm in here tonight as it was last week. I didn't get the heat turned up soon enough, and our radiator, our heating capacity is a little sluggish down here. But if any of you have questions, or if any of you would like to ask questions about how the course is going to progress or how you can get into the things that you particularly enjoy, we'd be glad to try to answer them. And also we would like to encourage you to come to any of our work sessions. Last week we said that you probably didn't want to commit 2 nights a week, and you probably don't, and our work sessions are on Thursday nights. But if any of you would like to come, we certainly welcome you so you can see the kind of projects that the older STEAM team members are working on, and we have 4 or 5 right now. guess about 3 connected with the cars, and two on the railroad. They're building track, and they're working on trucks for the railroad cars.
You just show up and somebody will put you to work.
That's pretty much it, although Mark Hopkins, who was here last week and will be here tomorrow night, he couldn't make it tonight, suggested that we should maybe have some kind of a team. If you newer fellows would like to tell us what you're most interested in, maybe we could kind of channel you toward some projects along those lines.
Just out of curiosity, when the dealers sold to Stanley in the original times, how did they train the user?
Very good question. I guess the best way to answer it is a couple illustrations. And this, I don't mean to belittle your question, so don't take it the wrong way, but the story goes that a fellow walked into the Stanley showroom up there at the factory one day, and one of the twins was there. And he had had a demonstration. They'd taken him out in the car, and he liked it and all. And came back, and he said, "Well, Mr. Stanley, I'd like to own one, but I don't think I could ever learn to operate it." And Stanley said, "Well, if you can't, why ask your wife to do it?" He said, "She can boil water on the stove, and it's the same thing." Well, not quite that simple. I didn't mean to give you that kind of an answer, but my aunt, who was newly married in 1913, my father's sister, and he was selling Stanleys, my dad was, I guess he thought his sister should have a Stanley. So he ordered her, and it was shipped down here in 1913, 10 horsepower touring car. So he's going to teach her how to run it. So his brother, the brother of both of them, had a new baby. And the brother's wife's name was Bertha. It was my aunt. So, and this is told by my father's sister, who was the owner of the new car. She told me this story after my dad had passed away. She said, he said, "Now, Anna, he will go over and get Bertha and the baby. They lived on the other hill over here. And then we'll take a little ride. And I'll show you how to drive the car." So they did. So they got the 4 people in the car, and they go to Hookhesson, which is the next town over here, if you're not familiar with this area. And he made it out all right, but my father was driving. And got ready to come home, and he sees the trolley out there. He said, "I got to go to work. I'm going to take the trolley back. Now you make your way home." And I said, "They got home, but she doesn't know how." Well, I don't know really. I think it was a little bit that a number of the people who bought these cars probably knew a little bit about steam. They worked in mills or factories, but yet all of them didn't, because a lot of doctors owned them, country doctors. They wouldn't have had any experience with steam. And my father used to say that the trouble with mechanical type people getting a hold of them, they always wanted to improve them. And the Stanley was a tinkerer's dream. You could change this and change that and think you're making it better and do all kinds of things. And he said they always made them worse, so that the people, the more professional type people like the doctors, wouldn't tinker with them all the time, and they'd make out better. There was no showrooms. I shouldn't say there were no showrooms. There were in the bigger cities. My dad never had a showroom here. He never had any cars to sell, I guess. He took orders and then ordered the car, and they were shipped, and sometimes they were back ordered. Sometimes you'd have to wait 3 or 4 months for what you wanted, I take it, and other times not that long. He went to the factory a few times and drove the cars home where the fellow who bought the car wanted to do that. But most of the time they were shipped down by train, I think, and unloaded here and then probably checked out and delivered. The first car my dad bought back in 1940, the first in the collection, came from a farmer neighbor who had a grist mill 2 miles up the stream here, and he bought it, and his grandson is still around, and he remembers riding in it when he was just a little fellow with his grandfather. In fact, I've taken the grandson on a couple of tours with me in that car, and he's had a big time, but he's in his 80s now, he's older than I am. But he said, I don't think my grandfather ever understood the car. He said he ran the boiler flooded all the time, just kept the water right at the top. But he never damaged the engine on that car because that engine has never been out of the car since it was new. And we have run it, I know, probably 50,000 miles since we've had it. And he never ran it much. He ran it 9,000 in 6 years and then laid it up. And my dad bought it in 1940 when I was 27 years old. But there's a case of a fellow who really didn't understand it too much, but he made out with it somehow. I guess he was told, whatever you do, don't run the boiler out of water, so he just kept the boiler full all the time, which is not a good idea either.
It's a great history.
But here, to finish your question, I really can't answer it as to what procedure they went through. I think they figured they could teach somebody to drive one in 2 or 3 hours maybe, and then they'd be all right. But some would be and some wouldn't. You know, it just depends on how they would make out with it.
The books for them were pretty well written, the manuals all, especially by 1918. So everything, little things you had to do and watch and stuff like this, much more so than maybe some of the car manuals today. A lot of detail on how to, and in fact, stuff on them how to maintain them. Drawing, pictures, stuff like that.
Well, I can promise you that all the lectures won't be this long and won't be this boring. And these fellas last year who did the series are the same ones doing it again this time, and they will have refined it a little, even better than last year. And they'll do a nice job. And I appreciate their doing it, and we appreciate your interest. And I know you've all read our invitation to join, and you realize that there is some responsibility to it, along with hopefully a lot of fun. And anytime you want to drop out, just tell us you don't have the time, or you don't have to say you don't have the interest. Just say you're not going to come anymore.
Just don't show up.
Don't show up.
Can't come get
The
it.
only thing about not showing up, I still have some fellows on the mailing list who haven't been around for about a year, and if they're not going to come again, I'd like to, drop them off. I just don't like to arbitrarily drop them. Anything else? I don't think we planned any refreshments tonight, so.
Wait 2 weeks from tonight.
You fellas from last week, don't expect it every week.
Get spoiled.
Roseanne,
In the